Okay, I'm going to talk about lineup. It's one of my favorite, very simple ESL activities that's ideal for kind of a time filler or just like a party day or as an icebreaker as well. So the way it works is that students have to line up in order in a line according to a certain criteria. So it could be their age, their birthday date in the year, like May 15th or June 20th, whatever. It could be their height, it could be their number of people that live in their house together. The key is you can do it two different ways. So the first way is that students have to do it without talking. So they just have to use their hands or body language. And the second way is that I require my students do it, but they only can speak English. So it really is up to you what you want to do. But then at the end, you can check the answers. So especially if they've done it silently, you could say, when's your birthday? Oh, January 3rd. February 2nd, March 4th, and just make sure students are in the correct order. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite ESL activities that makes a really nice review activity before a midterm or a final exam. It's called SOS. So if you've played SOS before, there's a grid and you have to write either an S or an O, and the goal is to get 3 in a row, SOS. Then you put a line through it and you get 1 point. The winner is the person with the most number of points at the end of the game. I adapted a little bit for my ESL classes. So I put students into maybe like 3 or 4 teams, and I assign a symbol to each team. So maybe like star, square, and triangle. Then I have a list of review questions, and I ask a review question to the first team, the star team. If they answer correctly, they can choose where to put their star. And I do like A, B, C, D, E, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they could say like A4 just to make things go a bit more smoothly in class instead of randomly like going around trying to like get them to tell you which one. And so the winner is the team that has the most number of 3 in a rows of their symbol. I'm going to talk about using the game Apples to Apples in your ESL classes. So you can buy Apples to Apples as a junior version or as an adult's version. So that's a good option. However, you can also make your own game using vocabulary that your students will know or that you want to review. So the way it works is that you can come up with a whole pile of adjectives, and I kind of color code them with one color, and then you can also come up with nouns that are a different color. So for all the students that are playing, you can do teams or you can do individuals. Each person or team will get 5 to 7 adjectives, kind of depending on how many cards you have. And then you can choose a noun. And so whatever noun you choose, the team or the individual has to match an adjective to it. Whoever is the judge, I act as judge for the first one, can choose their favorite. And then you can keep playing and you can appoint different judges who will choose their favorite combination. Whoever has the favorite combination gets 1 point, and you can play until someone gets a certain number of points. Okay, so that's it for Apples to Apples. Password is an ESL vocabulary activity that makes a great review. So the way it works is that I get a notebook or I get pieces of A4 paper, and then I write the vocabulary words that I want to review on it, 1 word per piece of paper. I divide the class into 2 teams, and then the first team sends up a person to the front, and they sit in a chair facing towards their team, and I stand behind them with the words. I show the word to the team, and they have to describe that word to the person sitting in the chair who has to guess what it is. So you can do it 2 different ways. You can time how long it takes the team to describe that word, and maybe it was 20 seconds, so then that team gets 20 seconds. And then you can play a certain number of rounds, and the team with the lowest time is the winner. Or you can do rounds of 1 minute, and the team can try to get as many words as possible within that 1 minute. I do not allow the first language. Students have to shout out words in English only. That's the key to this game. Okay, so that is it for Password. It's kind of just a fun review activity for vocabulary. So today I'm going to talk about 3 things, which is a very simple ESL writing activity. So I love activities that require no preparation and no materials. They are some ESL teaching gold, because if you have those last minute classes, an English teaching emergency, whatever happens, it's good to have a few of these kind of in your back pocket just to pull out. So 3 things, you put students into pairs, and they each have to choose 3 random nouns, a person, a place, or a thing. It can be related to a theme, such as like Christmas or going to school or school things or just whatever you want. So they write down those 3 nouns on a piece of paper, and then they trade the paper with a partner. Their partner has to write a story based on these 3 random words, so it can often be quite interesting and fun, depending on the words that their partner has chosen. The story can be silly, serious, not serious. I kind of leave it up to the students for whatever they want. Then in the end, they trade back papers with their partner, and they can each read the story that that other person has created for them. If you have a very small class, you can get students even to share their story with the class. So my version for very low-level students is that I get them to shout out the 3 words to me. I write them on the board, and then I get students to kind of help me make the story, but I do the writing on the whiteboard. Pictionary is one of my favorite ESL or EFL review activities. I'm sure you've played the game before. It's when you draw a sentence or a phrase, and then you have to draw it on a board, and then your teammates have to guess what it is. It also makes a great ESL review activity. So I put in a little bag or a box all the words or the phrases that I want to review in my class, and then I put students into 2 teams. Someone from that first team comes up, picks a word out of the box, and then draws it on the board, and their team has to guess what it is in English, of course. I don't allow them to use their first language if they have a common first language. And then I usually will give them a time limit. So I'll say like a minute for each round. So once they get that first word, they can draw another word out of the box and try to get as many points as possible in that first round or that 1 minute. Then the other team goes for 1 minute, and then you can play as many rounds as you wish. Dialogue substitution. It's one of my favorite ESL reading and speaking activities. Have you ever experienced this in your class? It happens to me all the time. You know, there's those little dialogues in the textbooks that are often kind of like the lead-in to the rest of the unit. So I put students into pairs and I tell them, okay, read the dialogue with your partner. And they just blah, 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 blah. And they're finished. And then I say, okay, so that guy Bob. And I ask a question about Bob from the dialogue and everyone's like, what? Who's Bob? And they actually like legitimately have no idea who Bob is, what Bob did, what Bob said, even though they had just finished reading it with their partner. You know what the problem is? It's not with my students, it's with me, because I didn't give them a reason to actually read carefully. This is the ultimate way to combat that. So this does require a bit of prep, so photocopy the page in your textbook, take out some of the keywords out of it. And then students have to read it together with their partner, but they have to fill in the blanks with these keywords. So the keywords could be things like the verbs, like the past tense verbs, or they could be things related to food or drink if you're teaching food or drink. Sometimes I'll put a little word bank at the top. Sometimes I won't. It kind of just depends on the level of the students. So it turns it from a simple just like reading out loud exercise to an exercise that focuses on meaning as well. So students actually have to pay attention to what they're reading. So today I'm going to talk about a very simple writing activity, dictation. I know dictation kind of has this negative connotation to it. It is a bit old school, which I understand. It kind of comes out of like the grammar translation method of teaching English from, I don't even know how long ago, hundreds of years ago, 1,000 years ago, something like that. However, I do think it does have value. So some of the reasons that I like to throw a bit of dictation into my classes is that it really helps students practice things like spelling, punctuation, including capital letters, question forms, that kind of thing, contractions, grammar, phrasal verbs, etc. So if you have a purely communicative class and students are just talking to each other, they may not even know things like capital letters or punctuation in English. Of course, it's important. If they're writing a business email, students have to know this kind of stuff. So that's why I like to focus on these things once in a while, and dictation is a great way to do that. So the way it works is that students get out a notebook or a piece of paper, and then you can read out, for beginners, you can read out a single word, orange. And they spell orange in their notebooks. That's the very, very beginner. Higher level students, I would say a sentence. Today is Monday. And they have to write today is Monday in their notebooks, including a capital letter, a period, all the correct punctuation in that. And then the highest level is to say something like a question form. For example, what day is it today? Students write, what day is it today? Then at the end of the activity, they have to answer the question. Today is Tuesday. Or you could say the answer form. Today is Tuesday. They write down today is Tuesday. And then at the end of the activity, they have to come up with a question form. What day is it today? Today I'm going to talk about this very simple activity. It's an error correction relay race. So I really like making error correction into a relay race because it turns something kind of like old and boring, error correction, into something kind of new and exciting by making it a race. It works best for kids because if you call anything a game, they'll be excited about it. And this legitimately is kind of a game, so you're not actually lying to them when you say this. I make up a worksheet that has like 10 to 15 errors on it. So maybe it'll be a paragraph, and the errors could be like things like spelling or grammar, punctuation, kind of whatever is appropriate for the level of students that you're teaching. And you also could kind of hit the highlights of what you've been teaching in the previous weeks. So I put students into groups of 4, and then I have them kind of, if possible, sit in desks that are back to back to back to back. So the first student gets the paper, and they have to read the paragraph or whatever you have and correct one mistake. Once they do that, they pass it back. That next person has to correct one mistake. One mistake, one mistake. And I tell them how many mistakes are on it. So if, for example, I have maybe teams of 4, I would try to come up with 12 mistakes. So each student would get to go 3 times. When they're done, they put up their hand, I come check. If they're correct, then they get it. If they're not correct, I usually will let them have a few more chances, or if another team may have won in the meantime, in which case I would stop the activity. Menus. So I love when students can practice real life stuff in my class. So find some menus online or go to your favorite restaurant. You can download often the PDF files, print them out, and you can do a million things with these menus in your class. Students can talk with their partner about what they would eat, what they would drink, if they like buying the most expensive meals at a restaurant, if they get dessert. And you could also do some role plays with it. So someone could pretend to be the waiter or waitress, and then the other student can order. And the waiter or waitress can ask a whole bunch of follow-up questions. Yeah, like if someone says, oh, I'll have a beer. Oh, what kind of beer do you have? And they can look on the menu and find out what kinds of beers. Or someone says, I'll have pasta. And the waiter or waitress would say, oh, would you like cheese? It's only $1 more or something. Just like whatever. There's a million things you can do with this. So make good use of menus in your class. Ball toss. So this is one that creates some serious excitement in class because there's a beach ball and you get to throw it at your friends. I've done it with kids, teenagers, adults. Everyone's had an equally good time with it. So take the beach ball, write a whole bunch of like food related questions. What's your favorite food? What's your favorite vegetable? How often do you eat out? Kind of the standard questions you would talk about food. Students have to toss the ball and they have to catch it, and wherever their right thumb is, they look right there and they see the question. And you can either have that student answer the question, or they could ask that question and then toss the ball to someone else who has to answer the question. So there's a whole bunch of variations. Be sure to check out the blog post on my website that has all the information on that. So you know something that everyone likes doing is giving advice. Everyone knows how to solve other people's problems, right? So that's why I love to do this activity with my ESL or EFL students. It's called Agony Aunt. Agony Aunt, it's just an advice column that was in newspapers, I guess in Canada or the US. And people write in with their problems, and then the Agony Aunt gives advice to these people and tries to solve their problems for them. So this is ideal for the unit in the textbooks that you can find, should and shouldn't, for giving advice. So the way it works is that I come up with a problem, something that's common kind of in the country that you're teaching and age appropriate as well. So I taught university students in Korea mostly. So my problem was there were these high school students, or a high school student that was studying for it's called the Sunung exam. I guess it's kind of like the SAT that students would take in their grade 12 year. And it basically determines their entire future, their score, based on that, what university they'd get into. And it was kind of this like very big, serious, kind of like scary, stressful thing that students would spend their entire lives preparing for, basically. So anyway, it was this student in grade 12 preparing for this exam. And they were exhausted, they weren't sleeping, they weren't eating, they were losing a bunch of weight, and basically they were just in really rough shape. And they were so worried about their score on the test, their parents were hassling them to study more, and it was just a big mess. So I'd put students into groups, and then I'd give them something like probably 10 to 15 minutes, and I'd give them some time to write advice to this student. So what they would say to this person. And it was such a great one to do because all my students had been through that same process at some point in their lives, even recently as the previous year. So they all had good things to say to that student. So in groups, And then once that was done, they would read out their advice to the class. And then I would generally choose which advice I thought was best. And I mean, it was very subjective. So just kind of whatever advice was kind of some solid advice. And they did a good job using should and shouldn't. And yeah, they did quite a good job presenting it, that kind of thing. So I would just say like, oh, I really liked Team A over here. Their advice was really great and you did a good job presenting, good work. But I would also say, oh, but from Team B, I liked this idea that you said, something like that. So yeah, just try out this activity, Agony Aunt, for when you're teaching about advice. It's called flip chart. So you could have a chart or a notebook or even just pieces of A4 paper and write up a bunch of the target vocabulary that you want to review. Then I divide the class into 2 teams, and one person from the first team comes and sits on a chair at the front of the class. They're facing their classmates, and then I stand behind that person with the flip chart with the words on it. I hold up the first word so that their teammates can see it, and then their teammates have to describe that word to the person sitting in the chair, and that person has to guess what the word is. So you can do it in a couple different ways. Sometimes I like to do like rounds of 1 minute, and then they'll try to get as many words as possible in that 1 minute. Or sometimes I use a timer, and then I time how long it took that team to describe that word to that person. Do a few different rounds, and then the winner is the team with the most points at the end of the rounds. So today I'm going to talk about just a very simple warm-up or review activity that you could use in your ESL classes. It's called Memory Circle. So if you want to use Memory Circle as kind of a name game, icebreaker, warm-up kind of thing, you could get students to say a true statement about themselves. My name is Jackie and I like cats. Then the next person in the circle could go and they repeat what they've already heard. Her name is Jackie and she likes cats. My name is Bob and I like ice cream. The third person goes, her name is Jackie and she likes cats. His name is Bob and he likes ice cream. And my name is Katie and I love shoes. Whatever it is, and you just go around in the circle. It's a really nice way for students to learn each other's names. And you can change what students have to say to basically anything. Like you do what kind of food people like, what kind of hobbies, etc. The other way to use this activity is as a review activity. So for example, if you're talking about the simple past, you could get students to say what they did last night. My name is Jackie and I went paddleboarding. And then the next person, her name is Jackie and she went paddleboarding. My name is Tom and I made pizza. And you just continue on that way. And for that one, the rule I would make is the students have to use a different past tense verb for their own statement. So today I'm going to share a quick activity called 5 senses. It's great for just teaching English learners. You can use it as a quick warm-up or kind of a time filler. There's a ton of different ways to use this activity. You just have to bring an object into the class, and I'll use the example of a can of Coke. And then students have to think about their 5 senses and then use words to describe that object. So I usually will put students into like pairs or groups of 3 or 4, and they can do this either by speaking or by writing. It's up to you. It doesn't matter for this activity. So for example, I'm kind of doing this on the fly, so like be kind. So anyway, the can of Coke, sight or seeing. If you look at the can, you could use colors to describe it, like red, white. The writing on it, you could describe that. You could say it's like a cylinder or like a tube. It's like it looks metallic on the top. Any of those words, so just kind of descriptive words to describe it. The smell, you could say it smells kind of like sweet or licoricey, or I don't know, I feel like it tastes or smells like a little bit like metallic or something because of the can, so when you first put it to your mouth. So any of those words. It tastes, I don't know, I don't like Coke that much, so I think it tastes like bitter and like kind of harsh. Some people think it tastes sweet, some people think it tastes delicious. I don't know, there's a million words you could use to describe how Coke tastes, or like fizzy. Fizzy, I guess, is another good word. And then touch. Touch is interesting. You could say like it's liquidy, or it's like fizzy or bubbly, or yeah, so there's lots of words for that. Hearing, the last sense. So you could say like when you open the can, like the pop, or like a pop or snap or like something like that. Then when all the fizz comes out, it's kind of just like a rush of air, or like bubbly sound or something like that. So you can do this with any object. And of course, Not all the things might apply. So if you don't do a food or drink, obviously taste is kind of a weird one, because like who's gonna lick an eraser or like taste an eraser or a pencil or whatever. So you could just say like turn it into like the four senses activity instead of the five senses or whatever, you know? Okay, so that's just a simple activity as a time filler or warm up. Try it out with your students and I think you'll like it. I always have a really good time. And my students always come up with very creative words, and they're actually way better at it than I am. I should have actually filmed them doing this for this video than me, because my words are not as amazing as what they come up with usually. So today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite ESL activities called Fly Swatter. So Fly Swatter is the ultimate activity if you want to create some kind of fun and excitement in your classes. And I know when I describe it, you might think, oh, this sounds like a great kids activity. However, it works for everybody. I've used it with kids, teenagers, university students, adults. Everybody has really enjoyed it. It's basically a vocabulary activity. So all over the whiteboard, write down a bunch of words that students are familiar with, maybe that you've taught them in the previous weeks. Kind of space them out at random intervals, and then divide the class into two teams. One student from each team comes up to the whiteboard, give them each a fly swatter, and then for absolute beginners, you could simply say the word Tuesday. The first student to slap their fly swatter on Tuesday gets a point for their team. And you can either erase the word and put a new word or just leave the word there. It's up to you, kind of depends on the level, and then also how many vocabulary words you have. Higher level students, I often give hints. I would say something like, it's the day after Monday. First student to slap Tuesday gets a point. And then those students go sit down, and then the next student on their team comes up to the board. If you want to make idioms memorable, try this activity. The way it works is that I have a bunch of idioms, and they're often related to a theme, like for example, Christmas idioms or food idioms, sports idioms, something like that, whatever you're teaching your students. And then I make a list of the idioms, and students have to choose one of them. And then they have to draw a picture of the literal idiom. So for example, it's raining cats and dogs. They might have a person with an umbrella and little pictures of cats and dogs. And then after they draw their picture, I get them to make a few example sentences and then also to find out what it actually means in English. It's raining cats and dogs means it's raining a lot. So then after that, I get the students to just stand up very quickly and they show their picture to the class. And then everyone can kind of laugh because it's usually quite ridiculous, actually, if you draw these idioms literally. And then I get them to explain what it is in English and then to give their example sentences. Surveys. So surveys are great for ability. So on my piece of paper, I write down a bunch of questions related to ability. Can you play soccer? Can you speak 3 languages, etc.? Then students have to go around the class asking their classmates, can you speak 3 languages? If someone says yes, they have to write down that person's name and then ask a follow-up question. For example, what languages do you speak? Oh, I speak French, English, and Korean. And then they would write French, English, and Korean. If their classmate says no, they have to ask them another question on that list. So it's very simple to make your own surveys just based on whatever the topic is and the level, etc. But it works very, very well with ability, is a nice topic. Is the secret job. So I get students I'll get them to work in pairs most often in bigger classes, and they have to think of a secret job and then write down some sentences as hints. They have to think about the job, what the people have to do. So for example, a teacher has to help people, and they could write a more general or a more specific question, kind of depending on what they want. But I say, you shouldn't say they have to teach people because it's too obvious. So they should give a little bit more of a general one. Teachers don't have to drive a car. They can get to school without driving a car. Teachers needn't have to use dangerous tools. And then teachers mustn't be mean. So you can think of any hints that you want, and then after all the students have done that, they can join together with another group and then they give the hints to each other, or in smaller classes you could just do this together as a whole class. This game is 2 truths and a lie. It's really good for ability. So students have to think of 2 true statements about what they can do and then 1 false statement about what they can do. So for example, I can cook Korean food, I can play tennis well, and I can play the piano. And then students would have to quiz me. I usually give about 2 or 3 minutes for this to try to catch me in which one is the lie. And they would know probably that it was piano because they would ask me a question about something and I would have no idea about anything piano related. So they would know for sure. Called Postcards. So the most difficult thing about this activity is getting your hands on a bunch of postcards. The good news is that it's often easy to find. If you live in kind of a tourist area, there'll often be some like on sale. You can get a pack. If you have like a bit of money in your school budget, you can sometimes get a pack of 20 for like $5, something like that. So pick up a bunch of postcards and then distribute one to each student. Or if you don't want to spend that much money on postcards, you could put students into groups of 2 or 3 or 4. The students can look at the picture on the front of the card, and then they have to write to a family member or friend about their trip. So you could talk kind of about like what things people typically write on postcards, maybe what they're eating, how the weather is, how the plane ride was, things that they've seen, activities they've done, that kind of thing. So students just can make up whatever they would like to write on the postcard. It doesn't have to be true, of course, because they probably have never been to that place. But yeah, they can just think about and write whatever they want to whoever they want. And then in the end, students can trade postcards with another group, and that other group or person can read what the other students have done. And postcards are quite colorful and fun, so posting them around the class for a little while works as well too. Yeah, so check out this super simple activity, and students really seem to enjoy it. One of the most important but overlooked skills is proofreading and editing. To be honest, if you are a business person or you're a teacher, you have any kind of job, you probably have to write things. And if you can't proofread and edit your own work, nobody will really take you seriously. If you write a business email that's full of mistakes, who's going to take you seriously? Or if you're a teacher and you're writing a bunch of report cards and there's a bunch of mistakes in them, the parents are going to wonder who is actually teaching my kids. That's why I love to teach my ESL or EFL students how to proofread and edit. So I know it's a little bit old school, it's a little bit boring, however, it is a very important skill. So the best way to do it is to have a little checklist. And this will of course depend on the level of the students, but some very basic things to add on there are punctuation, including like periods, commas, question marks, capital letters, subject-verb agreement, like they are, he is, things like that. Of course, spelling, overused words like great, awesome, good. There's so many better adjectives and descriptive words that you can use to replace that. So those are the most basic ones, and then it can get into way more complicated things as well, depending on the level. Okay, so that's it. Don't overlook proofreading and editing with your students, even if it's a little bit boring. Push through and do it with them because it actually is a very important skill. Round Robin Story is a very simple ESL writing activity. It's fun because it involves groups. So generally, writing is kind of a solo activity. That's why I like to try to make some kind of group or team writing activities just to kind of spice things up a little bit in my English classes. So Round Robin Story, each student has a piece of paper and a pen, and they start the story off with something. So it could be like a theme, or it could just be general, like leave it open, and they write one sentence. So there was a guy named Bob. And then everyone passes their paper, one to the left or to the right or in the circle or just however your classroom is set up. And then the next student adds a sentence. There was a guy named Bob. Bob went to the store yesterday. And then the students pass the paper along. And when this time is almost up, it depends how many sentences you want to add, depends on the level of the students and how much time you have for this activity. I'll generally say, okay, there's 2 more sentences left. Wrap up the story. So then they have to kind of like read the story and a little bit figure out how to end it. When all the stories are done and the time is up, I'll collect the stories and then I'll quickly read them out. Or you could have students just read the stories themselves. You could put them on the wall, something like that. So one of my favorite review activities that's very simple and requires nothing in the way of preparation for materials that I like to use for my English learners is that sentence correct? It's the ultimate time filler, review activity, homework thing, something that you can put on your exam. So basically you just write up a bunch of sentences. Some of them will be correct, some of them won't be correct. In pairs, students have to look at the sentence and they decide if it's correct, they do nothing. They just put a check mark. If it's incorrect, they put an X and then they have to make the required changes. That's it. Super simple. So today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite ESL presentation activities called Show and Tell. And I know you probably have done show and tell in like kindergarten or elementary school, something like that. But you can also use it in your ESL classes for any age or level of students. So the way that it works is I get students to bring something from home that's special to them, or it can be like a big thing, or like a living thing like a cat or dog. In that case, students can just take a picture of it or print out a little picture and then show that instead of actually bringing the object. And then students can just do a little presentation about what that object is, how long they've had it, why it's special to them. You can set up whatever criteria you want. And it kind of depends on the age and the level of students, what they're capable of. You can do two styles. So one style is that all the students could go in a single day. So you kind of just have like a presentation day and everyone does the show and tell together. Or you could do maybe like one or two students at the beginning of each class. So you kind of go on a schedule and you just kind of get through the whole class over the semester. And yeah, it's kind of a nice warm-up activity and it's a nice way to like kind of ease the students into English each class if you choose to do it that way. So today I'm going to talk about a simple listening activity that's great for beginners. It's called Me Too. So this activity works best if students can sit in a circle or kind of just in a location where they can kind of all see each other quite easily. So students have to think of a true statement about themselves. For example, I have a cat, I like pizza, I don't like playing sports, whatever it is. So the student says, I have a cat. And then if other students in the class could also say that's true for themselves, they could stand up and then they say, Me too. And then everyone can kind of look around and they could say, oh, you have a cat too, or like you play soccer as well, or just whatever the statement was. Everyone sits down and then the next person in the circle says their true statement about themselves. And then whoever it's also true for, everyone stands up and says, me too. Super simple. It's great for kids. And yeah, it's ideal for beginners. It's kind of a simple, very, very simple listening activity and also a bit of a speaking activity as well. Today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite, very simple ESL activities for kids called I'm an Alien. So this is ideal if you are talking or teaching about something that you think students already know a good bit of information about. So for example, like Christmas, you're doing a Christmas themed lesson, then I would pretend that I'm an alien. And then I would say, Christmas, what's Christmas? And then students would start shouting out, there's Santa, and then there's reindeer, and you get presents. And then I would say, who's Santa? What's Santa? What's a reindeer? Why do you get presents? What do you get? Where are the presents? And I would just ask so many questions. So basically you're pretending that you've never been to Earth and you don't know any information about the basic topic. Why would you do this? It's because it helps students activate this prior knowledge that they have. So anything that you teach students subsequently is more memorable. So today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite ESL warm-up activities. It's called word association. It's basically a mind map of words or brainstorming words, but kind of in an organized fashion. So I would use this activity if I'm teaching students something I think they already know a lot about. For example, sports, weather, hobbies. All those things are very common in ESL textbooks. So unless I'm teaching like absolute basic beginners, students probably already know a lot of sports or know a lot of weather vocabulary words. So I like to use this activity to help them kind of elicit their prior knowledge so that any new things they learn will be easier for them to remember. So for example, if we're doing weather, I would write weather on the board and then draw a circle around it. And then I would get students, I would say, shout out words that you know about weather. And they would say like snowy, snow, hail. And then that would kind of be maybe like winter things. So I'd have a little category of winter weather. And then maybe they would say hot, humid, sunny, and that would be kind of summer weather. So I'd have another little hub of sunny. Just keep going until the students have kind of come up with all the words they know. And then jump into your lesson. It's a nice way to introduce any sort of ESL lesson on most topics. Yeah, and then students can just think, oh, I already know a ton of words about weather. So they feel like less stressed out and overwhelmed for any new words that they might be adding to that in your lesson. So today I'm going to talk about a very simple game called Word Challenge. It's basically an ESL spelling game. I love activities that require nothing in the way of preparation and then also nothing in the way of materials. These are some of the best activities to have if you kind of have this emergency class that's thrown at you, or you have a few extra minutes to kill and you finished all the things that you had on your lesson plan. This is kind of a nice one to do. So the way it works is that you can have a word list of vocabulary words that you've recently taught your students, or for the no prep version, just kind of come up with them on the fly. It depends how good you are at that. I personally prefer to have a list. Coming up with things on the fly is possible, but I get kind of stressed out about it. So I definitely prefer to have a list. And then put students into teams. So the number of teams will depend on how much whiteboard space you have. So if you have quite a big whiteboard, you might want to have like 3 or 4 different teams because everyone needs to line up in a section. So if you have, say, 4 teams of 4, you can draw lines, 3 lines down the board, and each team gets 1 section of the whiteboard. And then the first person at the board, 1 person from each team will take a marker and line up, and then their 3 teammates will be behind them. And then the teacher says a word, and the first student to spell that word correctly gets 1 point for their team. I usually make a rule that the people behind them are not allowed to talk to them. If the people behind them can give hints, it gets really crazy really, really quickly. Everyone is yelling and screaming and just like it's kind of a lot. So it's quite exciting to do it that way, but I personally prefer just having quiet, and then the students at the board can race and do it. When you're done that, the winner gets a point, and then the next person in line goes, and that first person goes to the back of the line.